Hi, Taniya. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, you've written one book.
Correct.
Okay. Well, before we get to that book, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what makes you want to write.
What makes me want to write? Well, basically, I wrote my memoir. So it is the story of my life. I was born in 1980. And when I was born with brittle bone disease, formerly called, technically called osteogenesis imperfecta, but I leave that out because nobody can pronounce it. But what it is a disease in which the body produces insufficient amounts of collagen or poor quality collagen. And it affects your entire body is made up of collagen. And having this disease, I to date have broken 104 bones.
Goodness.
And people always ask me, they go, wait a minute, do you even have that many bones in your body? I'm like, I think you have 206. But in my instance, it also spilled over into other parts of my body. I had a brain hemorrhage when I was 23.
Hmm.
I had to have my heart repaired because my heart, one of my valves wasn't functioning properly and things like that. And I had this story. I like to say it's a cool story. People call it, sad and inspirational and all those sorts of things. But I had this story and I was like, I'm sitting with this. I'm like, I should write a book. So then I did.
I have heard of that disease
Mm-hmm.
as brittle bone disease. I don't think I can
Right.
pronounce the other word. When were you diagnosed with that?
I was diagnosed with that when I was about 6 years old. And that was after a long battle of my parents being accused of abusing me.
My goodness.
No healthy 4 or 5 year old child comes into the emergency room every 2 weeks with a broken something. And that's what was happening in my case. Every couple of weeks I was breaking something else, and my parents were rushing me to the ER, and Child Protective Services got involved, and they had me in this room, and they said, "Mommy and Daddy, they spank you, don't they?" And my parents, I was like, "No, and I'm only 5. Why am I alone? And where are my parents?"
Yeah, yeah.
And it wasn't until my doctor or a doctor in the emergency room accidentally rebroke my arm while taking a cast off that they were like, "Oh, this might be something different."
Hmm. So, how do you know? You've researched this disease, no doubt. When was it discovered that people could have this disease?
I know of people having it as far back as, and it's crazy to say as far back, but I've heard of people with it, in the 70s and possibly even 60s. I don't know anybody, personally that can tell me when it was actually discovered.
Hmm. So, what do you do to make your life just a little bit better? Do you take medication for this?
No, currently I don't take any medication. There's not medication for, there's no cure for the disease.
Okay.
My orthopedist likes to say, I'm just here to put out the fires. If I break something, I go to the doctor and he sets the bone, I wear a cast and move on with life. Um, the fracture rate, it seems to plateau a bit after puberty. That's just the nature of the disease. So around 15, 16, my fractures became definitely less frequent. I wasn't fracturing every couple of weeks. And but then from what I understand, women have told me it ticks up again after menopause. And I already said I was born in the 80s. So we'll be I will be able to get back to you on how that goes.
You have a real sense of humor about this difficulty that you're faced with.
Yeah, I do. People ask me, how do you laugh about this stuff? And it's like,
Sometimes,
well,
yeah,
my mom used to say, if you don't laugh, you'll cry.
right. Did you say you had a brain aneurysm or a brain bleed of some sort?
It was not an aneurysm. I had a brain hemorrhage. I was 23 and in college, and I was having a horrible headache, just migraines, and they were terrible. And I kept going to the doctor. I went to the ER, and they would do imaging and they would tell me, you're fine. You're just stressed, because it was around midterm season.
Right.
And I was in college and I was a theater major. So I had two shows in production, one a large stage musical and that I was the stage manager, or no, I was the assistant director on. And I was in a show, a children's theater production, all at the same time. And they were like, you're doing too much, go home, relax, you'll be fine. And I was like, no, this is a really bad headache. And then one day I was in rehearsal. I was like, I have to go lay down. But something in me said, tell somebody you're going to lay down. You're going to the gym to take a nap. And I did. I told the assistant director, I said, look, I'm going to go take a nap in the gym. Come find me in a couple hours if I don't come back. And I'm glad I said something, because lo and behold, a couple of hours later, I hadn't returned. The stage manager and one of the cast members were concerned, and they came looking for me, and I was completely unconscious I didn't even find the gym. I couldn't find the gym. I ended up going to the dance studio, laid down, and I was completely unconscious. And they called 911. Actually, they called my parents, and I went to the emergency room with a massive brain bleed. I had to have an 11-hour surgery that saved my life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This story that you mentioned, is that in your book?
It is.
Okay. It's a memoir, yes, you said.
Yes.
I'm curious, how long is it? How many pages?
It's a little less than 200 pages. It's 196, I believe.
Okay. Fair size. How's sales for you?
Sales could be better.
I know it's a question I just sometimes dread asking.
Being an independent author is hard, because you're the author. You're the only thing you're not is the printer. You're the author, the publisher, the marketer,
How about
and
editing?
the sales rep.
Do you do your own editing, or you find that out?
No, I hired an editor, hired an outside editor. I hired a cover designer and a photographer again.
Yeah. Yeah. And when did you write this book? Well, how old is it?
I released it in October, but I wrote it. It's funny. I wrote it right after I got out of college. I was 24, I was 24. I survived a brain bleed. I was like, this life is awesome. I'm going to inspire the world, right? So I write this book, and then COVID hit, and I went, and I had put it on the shelf. Oh no, I wrote it, and I was trying to get interest, and I couldn't get any of the big guys to even want to read it. I was sending out book proposals. And so I shelved it for a while, and then COVID hit, and I was like, I should release my book now. And then I sat down and I read it, and I was like, by that point, I was almost 40. I was like, 23-year-old me thought she knew what she was talking about. Oh,
Lots of editing, I bet.
yeah. So I went back and I actually rewrote it. And because the most important, probably, I would say one of the most impactful parts of the book hadn't happened when I had originally written it. My mom died. And my mom, being a disabled child, she was my advocate. She was my voice. She was everything. I like to say she was a superhero that Marvel could never dream of. And she had passed away when I was 29. So in the time between me writing it and rewriting it, I was like, wow, that needs to be in the book, because that grief, that all consuming, and the transfer of power, so to speak, she was now sick in a bed, and I had to watch that and things like that, had to be in there. So I rewrote it from scratch, and then I hired an editor, and that's when I released it. I released it at the end of last year.
Yeah. Okay. I remember being in theater. I was a musician. Maybe you can tell from the instruments behind me.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've been on stage a lot, and it's a pretty physical thing. When you were in college, you obviously knew about your disease by that point. How does that work that you do theater with a brittle bone disease? Because I remember some of the things I ended up doing was quite physical.
By the time I got to college, like I said, around puberty, my fracture rate definitely plateaued. I wasn't breaking as much, and I could walk. I was a full-time wheelchair user until I was 29. So I got to college, and I went to a small college on Long Island, and it didn't have an elevator, and I was still in a wheelchair. And I was astonished by the fact that they didn't have an elevator. I mean, even my high school had an elevator. And theater kids, if you know anything about theater, you know this. They're a tight-knit group of kids. And they were like, well, you're one of us. And they rallied behind me. And one by one, we were in all the same classes. They would carry my wheelchair up and down the stairs. And I knew, but I didn't have the guts or the courage to say to the dean of the school, you're violating, ADA law here. We're not talking 1970. We're way past that. We're in the 2000s, and you still don't have an elevator. But they would carry my wheelchair up and down the stairs, and I would walk, because I could do what they call therapy walk, which is walk small distances. Where I really struggled, but I was determined to do it, was in dance class, because I had to have, that was part of my course load. You had to take theater dance or theater movement or whatever they chose to call it at the time. And I couldn't keep up. And I wanted to push myself. That's always been part of my if it's something I shouldn't be able to do, it makes me or motivates me to want to do it 10 times more.
So your book makes it clear that this is about your life, having lived with brittle bone disease, just by the title alone. And does that spark any interest in publishers? Because something like that really should be out there for people to read and to inspire others who perhaps have this disease.
I like to think that it speaks to more than just having a disease. There's a lot of elements in the book. My mother, like I said, the biggest hurdle I had to overcome was not physical. It was the emotional struggle of grieving my mom's death and getting past that. And that didn't happen until I was 29 years old. And I like to think that there are themes in the book that speak to the masses. You don't have to just be disabled. We like to think that breaking is the end of it. That once something's broken, it's done. No, I've been broken 104 times. Breaking and falling apart are not mutually exclusive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I like to tell people that that was that's probably my tragic flaw, is that I always tried to be perfect. Often looks really, really messy.
So you must have been experiencing a lot of pain, especially as a child.
Yes.
Yeah, that must have been very difficult. How was playing for you when you were, 10 years old? How did you play?
I played just like any other kid, really. My mom, this is why, she made me who I am. She had this theory that she was not going to wrap me in bubble wrap. And there was not enough bubble wrap to keep me safe. And I remember the story, one of my favorite stories, my pear tree story. Me and my sister, we had a pear tree in the backyard of the house we grew up in. And I remember I'm like, I'm going to climb that tree. And we had this red wagon. She was my legs when I was a kid. So she pulled me around in this wagon, and, and we'd go outside and get into trouble together, and we'd sit under that tree and whatever. And one day I was like, I'm just going to climb it. And she's like, how are you going to climb it? I had ridiculous upper body strength because I pushed a manual wheelchair. And I said, pull me under it. And I stood and I balanced myself in the wagon and I grabbed onto the lowest branch that I could reach and I pulled myself up into the tree as high as I could get. And then I was like,
Now what?
I don't think I could rely on my legs to get me down. So I just dangled there for a while. And looking back, I mean, wanted she wanted to call my mother who was inside. And I was like, if you tell mom that I'm stuck in a tree, we may never be able to come out here again. Like,
oh, childhood. Yeah.
yeah, but no, I was a fearless kid and probably a handful. If my
Good for
mom
you.
could tell some of the stories, she would, but I used to play in my wheelchair. I had a boy who was a neighborhood kid and he was a friend. I liked to play with the boys. I wanted to play sports and he was pushing me in my wheelchair and kids always like to push my chair. And I was like, we were pretending I was in a NASCAR race. And I was like, faster, faster, not wearing my seatbelt, and then hit a crack in the pavement. And I went flying out of the chair and fell. I broke my elbow, my hip, and my femur that day. And I remember my mom being scolded by like other moms, mom shaming. You shouldn't let her play with normal kids. It's like, well, first of all, what's a normal kid? And my mom said, that's when she said, quite frankly, there is not enough bubble wrap to keep her safe.
Yeah.
And she sat by and gritted her teeth while I did some stuff. She let me join a wheelchair basketball team, but my childhood was normal. I was a normal kid.
Sure.
As normal as you can be, in a wheelchair. But yeah.
Well, your mother sounds like a wonderful person.
She was. Thank you.
Well, any final words you want to say about your book?
Well, the book is currently available on Amazon.
All right. Taniya, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. And I wish
Thank you. It's
all
been
the
great.
best.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. I wish you all the best in the future. And if you ever
Thank
write a
you.
second book, look me up. We'll talk about that as well.
It definitely will.
All right. Take care.
Thank you. You too.
And that's our show for today. If you like what I do here on Tell Me About Your Book, then please hit the like button and subscribe. And don't forget to ring that bell for future notifications. And if you are a self-published author, I would really like to speak with you. Until such time, keep on writing and be kind to one another.